Welcome to Planted, finding your roots in STEM careers. Journey with us as we navigate the winding path into tree and plant-related careers with professionals who have taken root or are still branching out. I'm Megan Wiesbrook.
And I'm Jessica Turner-Scoff.
In this season of Planted, we're exploring the fields of opportunity associated with plant and STEM careers. That's right, all the really cool industries and places that you get to work with plants.
Speaking of fields, one industry that a lot of people associate with plants is the agriculture industry. Our guest today is the very distinguished Dr. Ronda Hamm. Ronda is the Global Academic Relations Leader at Corteva Agriscience. Ronda, thank you so much for taking time out of your day to speak with us and telling us a little bit about your career journey.
Thanks. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for allowing me to talk with you and your audience about the exciting opportunities in agriculture with plants and a little bit about where I started with plants.
On every episode of Planted, we like to start by listing off 3 things that might seem random, but they have our guests in common. So can you tell us how insects, Miranda Cosgrove, and 3D life-size orange sculptures are related to you?
Yeah. So, the first one is easy. I'm an entomologist. So that means that I am a scientist that studies insects. So that is how insects are related to me. And in 2019, I had the honor of being selected as an American Association for the Advancement of Science, IFTHN ambassador, to serve as a role model for young women interested in STEM, which is science, technology, engineering, and math, with really the idea behind this of if she can see it, she can be it. So we want to provide visible role models for young girls to see themselves and what they can aspire to be, right? So through that program, I was given the opportunity to share my science of entomology on CBS Mission Unstoppable, hosted by Miranda Cosgrove. So that's the connection with me and Miranda Cosgrove and insects. And then finally, also, I'll just add, if you'd like to catch my episode, it is available on YouTube. And so I think you're going to link to that. And in addition to that, I, as an ambassador, I'm also one of 120 3D printed life-size statues as part of the IFTHN exhibit, which has been in Dallas, Texas, and in the Smithsonian in our U.S. national capital city of Washington, D.C. for the month of March for Women's History Month. So it's a complete honor to be able to attend the opening weekend of that event. And I met so many young future scientists, and they were super excited to meet me. And I was inspired by them just as much, hopefully, as they were inspired by me. But it was an incredible opportunity to interact with the public and talk about sciences around entomology and plants and agriculture, and really just the vast opportunities that are available to students and really everyone.
That's just awesome, Rhonda. We are so excited to have you. You're such an impressive person. And I do want to stress that we will be having on the bonus content those YouTube videos that you were talking about, as well as some amazing photos of that sculptural exhibit. So we are delighted to have you, and let's get started.
So Rhonda, you have such an interesting background, weaving together entomology, research development, outreach. But can you also tell us what it's like working with Corteva Agriscience and why someone should consider a career in agriculture?
Yeah, so agriculture is just so diverse that there's really something for everyone. I mean, I think people tend to hear agriculture and they think of production agriculture. So someone that is farming, and that is part of it. But really, there's so much more to agriculture and opportunities for those that are interested in technology or sales, marketing, legal, communications, finance. There's just so much involved in agriculture and so many different places that you can work. You can work in a laboratory, you can work in the field, you can work in an office, you can work at home. So I think that's something that I think people, have this vision of agriculture that maybe is a little bit limited in terms of just that's what we know, that's what we see, right? And so until you meet someone that is involved in agriculture in some of these other ways and in other places, you don't really see the impact and or the vast opportunities that are available there.
I think that's a great point. And I know that I grew up in a really rural environment. And so a lot of people were in FFA and 4-H, but I still think that there's a really limited view of what agriculture can look like as a career. And, especially I would love to talk about that link between insects and agriculture and how that background in entomology has led to your current career.
So my interest in agriculture really started through my interest in animals. So I wanted to become a veterinarian. That is what, as a young girl, that's the job that I saw that you could do and work directly with animals. So I wasn't aware that there were other things really involved in that until I was almost finished with high school. So it was between my junior and senior year in high school that I became aware of what entomology even was. And to be honest, I was terrified. I was not a fan of insects. They were scary for me. And I had a very strong reaction, and it was not a good one. And so in learning more about them after this internship that I had, I learned more about these creatures, what they do, why they're important. And as I learned more, they became less and less scary. And so I started understanding the impacts that they play in our food supply for both good and bad, right? So insects are kind of this weird dichotomy of we need bees and butterflies and pollinators. They do lots of really great things for us. But then we also have insects that are eating our crops and our pests and causing damage. And so really, for me, agriculture was super interesting and entomology was super interesting because of the variety of different crops and insects. And those are what have allowed me to have such a awesome experience and fun, really, career in agriculture. I've worked in everything from stone fruits, so think peaches, plums, nectarines, to citrus crops, to grapes, and row crops, even like corn and soybeans. So a vast number of different types of plants. All of those have different interactions with insects, both good and bad. And so there's always interesting questions to be looking at, exploring, answering, and solving problems for.
So I'm just curious, I have to ask, and I know you might talk about it a little bit later too, but which insect was it that I guess you had your first experience with to help you kind of overcome some of that, I'll call it hesitation around the field of entomology?
I like that. I like hesitation, but my visceral response to insects, nowhere near a hesitation. But my first insect that I worked with that really kind of led me down a path of saying, I can do this, was working with ants. Ants are this amazing colony, right? So they work as a team. They are really for the survival of the whole versus the individual. And they have some really interesting interactions that I hope we'll get to talk about in a little bit later.
Very cool. Well, in previous seasons and even in some of the episodes this season, we will be talking with and have talked with different people whose career path is in horticulture. And so I'm wondering if you can also talk a little bit about the difference, because they sound so similar, but are obviously very different and diverse fields. Can you talk a little bit about the difference between agriculture and horticulture?
Yeah, so I'll do my best because this is really a tough one because they're really closely related. So I actually looked up the definitions for these, and it says horticulture is the practice of garden cultivation, and agriculture is the production of crops and livestock. So obviously some of our garden cultivation are crops, right? So you can see that there's a really close relationship between agriculture and horticulture. It's all about growing something, right? I think it's the type of things that we grow. So in agriculture, it's really for the production of food. Horticulture sometimes is, sometimes isn't. Sometimes we're growing something just for the beauty of it or the scent of it or for whatever aesthetics, right, that we might be looking at. And so that's a little bit of a difference, but they're super closely related just because, again, it's all about the production and cultivation of a plant.
As you're saying that, I can just picture the Venn diagram in my head with the center just growing plants as compared to for horticulture and agriculture there. So I think that's great. And, I just want to address, too, that I met you through Seed Your Future, which is the national movement to get kids excited about careers in horticulture. So there is that great overlap. And I just think it's great that there's such a movement and such energy around getting people excited about working with plants and the wide variety of jobs, just like this podcast.
And I'll just add that if you haven't checked out the Seed Your Future website, there's a lot of really great information if you're interested in learning more about careers or looking for internships or looking for scholarships or even jobs on that platform. So I would take a minute to check it out if you haven't already.
Yeah, it's a great aggregate of resources. But back to you, Rhonda. What experiences along your career path have been the most rewarding and, sorry, not sorry, but fruitful?
Well, it's pretty hard to beat having a statue, but really it's more about what the statue means and what it's meant to do. And that's really to inspire the next generation of scientists. And I mentioned earlier, because if she can see it, she can be it. And so it's a very visible way to see women in STEM and what the variety of things you can do. I'm going back to that. And I really just want young women to see that they can have successful careers and they can accomplish anything that they put their minds to, even in fields that have traditionally been represented by men. And, hopefully by mentoring these young future leaders, that to me is one of the most rewarding and fruitful parts of what I get to do for part of my job. And just as a woman in science wanting to help the next generation.
So Rhonda, all the conversations with you that we've had so far, and even early enough in the conversation today, it's really brought to light for both Jess and I, just our perception of the agriculture field and how that doesn't always, I think, match what we thought, beforehand. So what would you say, or in your opinion, maybe what do you come across as one of the biggest misconceptions about the agriculture field? And, can you kind of debunk that for us, I guess?
Great question.
Yeah. So I like to describe that in the past, people described agriculture as it's cows and plows. And to me, that is just such a very narrow, that is part of it, but it's so much more than that. There are jobs definitely in those areas, but it's much more high tech, I think, and modern than we also give it credit for. So we use robotics, we use drone technologies, we use cutting edge research techniques. And in fact, a colleague of mine that's also one of the If Then ambassadors, her statue actually does have her holding a drone. And so we use drones in agriculture and in our research every day. So we're using cutting edge technologies and techniques to ensure a successful food supply. And so to me, it's a rewarding field where you directly have an impact on every single person and creature on the planet, because everything needs to eat, right? If you're a living thing, you have to eat something. And we have a direct impact on that. And so, we have to manage our industry so that we can tackle and solve those global challenges of feeding the global population and maintaining habitats around the world and sustainability.
I know our listeners can't see us, but I am nodding my head along. Everything you are saying. And I really appreciate the comment about the drone, because that's even on our logo of Planted. We have a drone. We also have a ruler, which I think is important to address, because there's many different ways you can do plant STEM. And, my entire dissertation was basically done with a ruler, but you can be super high tech, super low tech, everything in between. And it's just the great diversity of this career path.
So, and as an entomologist, I can certainly relate to that of the high tech versus low tech. My statue has an insect net. And so low tech for sure. But then we have some pretty high tech monitoring systems where we can look for insect pest populations in more high tech ways too. And I walk through the field with my iPad to take data and notes. So it's both high and low. You use the tool at the right time for the right thing.
That's excellent. Thank you. Thank you so much for that comment. It's just nice to put all those pieces together. And, Rhonda, speaking of, a wide array and diversity, you have so many diverse accolades and accomplishments. And, even beyond being the American Association for the Advancement of Science, If Then ambassador. But I want to go through a couple other of your awards. You are a Million Woman Mentors Trailblazer Award winner, the recipient of the Indiana Women of Achievement Award with a distinction in science education, and the recipient of the Entomological Foundation Medal of Honor. So you are incredibly distinguished. And so, what advice would you give to somebody who wants to follow in your footsteps?
So as a good friend of mine says, be you. It wasn't always an easy path, but my passion has always been in helping others learn and grow. So hence, most of my awards and accolades have been focused on empowering others. And I feel lucky enough to have been recognized for those efforts. But there were times when I knew others wouldn't necessarily respect the work that I was doing in these areas. But those were really important to me. And I was pretty good at it. And so I didn't let others deter me from where I could make the most impact and was going to be fulfilling for me and my future and my goals. So my advice is to stay your course, find mentors and supporters that you can lean on in those tough times. And I've had many people that have helped me in my journey. So it's not a journey of one. I would not be where I am. I would not have those awards without the others around me, helping push me, helping me see that that was the direction I was meant to do. So find your passion, find others that support your passion, and then follow that passion wherever it leads you.
That's incredible advice. And it's wonderful to hear from another woman in STEM who had to trailblaze their own trail. So you had to kind of trust your skills, trust your knowledge, and just, as cliche as it sounds, be yourself. But clearly, not knowing where you're going still can lead you to unbelievable places. So we also have some questions from some educators who we shared with them your background, a little bit about you, and they shared with us some things that they wanted to know as well. So can you tell us, one of their questions is, can you tell us a bit about an insect that directly affects agriculture and why you find it most interesting or adaptive, just something cool about one of the bugs you work with and how it's connected to agriculture?
Yeah, so I'll go back to my very first entomology experience, the one that basically introduced me to the field and made it not as scary. And in that project, I worked with ants in citrus crops. So ants are really interesting in agriculture because on the ground, they are considered to be a beneficial insect because they will eat other insects, right? So they'll eat insect pests. But in citrus in particular, in the trees, they get this insect called scale. And these scale attach themselves to the fruit and they produce this sticky substance called honeydew. And ants love this sticky, sweet substance. So they actually will become little farmers of these scale and spread the infestation. And they'll also protect these scale from other natural enemies. So ants actually become now a pest in the tree, whereas they were beneficial on the ground. So my project was to look for plant-produced chemicals that I could extract from plant material and use as a repellent around the bottom of a tree trunk so that I could keep the ants on the ground where they would be beneficial and not crawling up into the tree and becoming farmers and making a infestation of a pest worse. So for me, that was one of the most exciting and interesting relationships between a insect species and its plant, but also an insect and a plant, really.
I mean, just the fact these ants are maintaining livestock, like this, I just feel like this is layer upon layer of agriculture in this episode. It's so interesting. It's the complexity of nature is just astounding. But can you talk a little bit about, your educational process? So how did you pick your major in undergrad? What led you to pick out your graduate school? Can you just kind of talk about your process?
Yeah, as an undergraduate, I mentioned earlier I wanted to be a veterinarian because that's what I saw animals. So I started out as a pre-vet major and thought that was the only way I could work with animals. But then through this internship that I had, I was still working in that lab and learning more about plants and plant sciences and crops and insects. And I decided I liked that too. And so I couldn't, major in everything because I wanted to finish a degree at some point. But I did find a major that allowed me to do some of all of it. And that was agricultural education. So I could take classes in plant science, in animal science, in agricultural mechanics. So I've actually taken a shop class and I know how to weld.
That's so cool.
Awesome skills to know and to learn. I love the diversity of classes I had to take. And so for me, that was kind of the perfect fit. I also loved this education and teaching space. I loved figuring out in creative, fun ways to make students interested in a subject that may sound boring, right? So that major suited me very well. So that's what my undergraduate degree is in. And actually my emphasis within that is plant science. So I changed from animal science even there to plant science just because of the diversity of what was offered, careers that I could go into and how I could use that in my future. And then for graduate school, to be honest, I followed the money. Cornell University offered me a full tuition and stipend for my graduate degree, but it was beyond that. I teased that, I followed the money. I did do that, but they also had a great entomology program there. It was also where my very first mentor and boss went to school and did his degree. So I had connections there with other entomologists that I knew that were successful in their careers and had come from there. So not only was it following the money, but it was also that I had mentors that I could look up to and recommended Cornell as a good school for me.
Yeah. And Cornell, that, even if you think you're just following the money, that is a very good school. So that is a good place to follow the money too.
So Rhonda, if you could go back in time and tell high school Rhonda something about the next 10 years, what advice would you depart to her?
Yeah, so my first reaction is to tell myself not to be afraid. But I think if I hadn't been afraid and learned to overcome my fears, I don't think I would have learned as much. So I think I'd have to tell myself that it will all turn out okay if you follow your dreams, stay your course, know what you're good at and what you're passionate about, and don't be afraid to blaze your own path. That's something that I tell students about career paths all the time, because there's this implied, when you think of a path, you think of a straight line, right? And careers are really not like that. I think of my career as a career adventure. It's windy, it's wavy. I've done things that I never expected to do ever in my life. And that's everything from, I've written patent applications. That has nothing to do with any of my background or my skills that I was trained in, but it was an opportunity that I took. I learned a ton. My scientific skills expanded greatly during that time. So you just never know. So don't be afraid, follow your dreams, blaze your own path.
That is excellent advice. And if you're the listener, if this is your first time listening to Planted, we highly recommend you check out season 1, where we talk about that, the winding journey into STEM careers. And, we really emphasize a lot of the points that you just mentioned, Rhonda. So thank you so much. It's always great hearing about other people who've experienced that career adventure. And I know I really personally love that description. Megan's nodding her head too. So you got fans in that. You've mentioned that, you've taught, you've done welding, you've have an abundance of technical writing. Can you talk a little bit more about your transferable skills?
Yeah. So I think anyone that's looking to either change careers or do something different, or just is wanting to learn and grow, there are some transferable skills that really, to me, cross-cut every field, every industry, and just life in general. And those to me are critical thinking and problem solving. So are you able to look at what needs to be done in this job? How can I do it better? How can I do it more efficient? What can I bring to thinking about this and solving a problem? That one, again, you can use anywhere. Communication. Communication is key for being able to talk about what it is you do, but also why it's important. And that could be in the written form. That could be verbally, that could be any number of ways, interpersonal, intrapersonal, there's so many different communication styles and ways. And depending on what you're good at, use that, right? Play to your strengths. I always tell people, play to your strengths. The others I'm thinking of are networking. A great network can just bring so much to you. Opportunities that come to you that you don't even know exist. And it's because you met someone and they said, hey, have you thought about this? Or, hey, I have an opportunity over here. I was just thinking about actually networking and talking with someone about this. And through my network, that's how I got my job at Corteva Agriscience. Is the very first one is I went up to someone I did not know. And I said, hey, that was a really interesting seminar that you just did. I have some questions. Would you mind answering some questions for me? And that led to an invitation to come and interview for a job. So networking is super important and key. The other thing I would say is stay flexible. I mean, in my career path, I think, in some of the show notes and such that'll be available here, you'll see the variety of things that I've done. And it has not been necessarily things you would expect. So staying flexible and open and knowing yourself and what you want to do and where you would like to go, I think is important. But stay flexible and keep an open mind, I guess. From my very first experience of this internship is going to be terrible because I'm terrified of insects, going into it with an open mind, saying, I'm going to learn something here and I'm going to put it to good use somehow, even if I never do it again, was something that I think has benefited me throughout my career. And did I know that as a high school student? Absolutely not. So, you learn things over time and in reflection. And I think those are all transferable skills that, again, it's partially how do you market those transferable skills to what the job is and where you want to go and what you want to do.
So, Ronda, what I love about this conversation also is that you have essentially hit upon both season 1 and season 2 of our podcast. So for listeners who have not checked out either one of those seasons, Jessica already mentioned what season 1 was about, but season 2 was all about traits in STEM. And some of those very traits of versatility and communication are all things that you just talked about being really great transferable skills that can relate to your career in a number of different ways. Networking is how we're connected with you for this conversation today. Bringing it all back to Planted, it wouldn't be an episode of Planted if we didn't ask your favorite plant. And I know we've talked a lot about insects and their relationship to agriculture this episode, but we are going to have you kind of finish up with letting us know what your favorite plant is and kind of what is cool for you about that particular species.
Yeah, so I'm going to go with grapevines.
Ooh, good one.
They give us grapes and raisins, which I love. They give us a fantastic adult beverage. And they are one of the crops that I have actually worked in and studied in the past with a insect interaction called a mealybug, which is a pest of grapevines. So I'm going to go with grapes.
That's great. And this episode's been so great because, you've talked about mentorship, diversity, and I really appreciate how you emphasized keeping an open mind with your career. And, you kind of touched on that old improv game of yes and I feel like that's been a large part of your career is just saying yes to new opportunities and having it work for you. So just fantastic. Thank you so much. And we just really appreciate you taking the time to talk with us today.
Thank you for having me. It's been an absolute pleasure working with the two of you, and good luck to your listeners in whatever they're going to do next with plants, hopefully.
This episode of Planted, Finding Your Roots in STEM Careers, was made possible by the Morton Arboretum and the Multimedia Services at College of DuPage. Check out additional resources and bonus content at www.mortonarb.org/plantedpodcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe, like, and share. But this is Jessica Turner-Scoff
and Megan Wiesbrook,
and we hope you'll continue to join us as we journey into STEM careers.